I used to be a park ranger for the lovely Shenandoah National Park out in Virginia, back in the late 80s. It was a much simpler time for sure, a bit more difficult for communications. Nobody was carrying a mini computer in their front pockets yet, that's for sure. That simplicity of the past, however, was able to harbor some deep and dark secrets, sometimes more so than how things are now. Obviously, Shenandoah is not Yellowstone. It's probably not even known by most people out there, and it's nowhere near as vast as the Rockies, but there is still plenty of wilderness out there to lose yourself in, sometimes more literally than you would ever wish for. It was starting to turn to fall, and the leaves were beginning to shift over to those patchworks of reds, oranges, and yellows, but there was still that hint of green. And there were still a few days left of that in-between weather, where it can get fairly warm in the days, but also pretty cool at night. As such, we were not dealing with a lot of campers, or tourists that wanted to get out into the park. But there were still a few stragglers that wanted to squeeze in that super late vacation before the school year got into full swing. That's actually how this all started. I'd done my rounds on the grounds, and everything seemed pretty normal. There really wasn't a whole lot to report. Then, late that Saturday afternoon, I got a call over the radio. One of the families needed assistance locating someone. At first, the details were sketchy, but I quickly learned that it was a family with a mom, dad, 9-year-old son, and a 13-year-old daughter. And the 13-year-old daughter, Ellie, was missing. When I got that detail, I started to feel a bit ill. I have a pretty strong resolve, but a 13-year-old girl missing in the woods is not something that you want to hear, because the worst-case scenarios will always play in your mind first. I drove up and talked to the family about what was going on. I was informed that Ellie and her brother were bickering a lot, typical sibling stuff, and she told her mom that she was going to take a walk because she didn't want to spend any more time around her brother. Her mom agreed, and told her to stay close, but she had not come back since then. It had been about 3 hours, and her parents were starting to get frantic. The sun was already setting, and time was not on our side. I radioed back to the station, and we got a search team put together pronto. Search and rescue at Shenandoah was pretty tight-knit. We knew what we were doing, but something about that evening was feeling off. Not like we were scared that we wouldn't find her, but more like the air had a bit extra chill to it. Or I was a bit more sensitive to the cool breeze. Thankfully, if anything, it was just going to be light jacket weather, and the odds of Ellie succumbing to the elements was rather low. There was obviously other things to worry about, mostly wildlife, but I was keeping those thoughts out of my head, hoping that this 13-year-old girl had just gotten a bit lost, and that we would find her rather quickly. We searched the rest of that afternoon for several hours, into the night. We were searching, calling out for Ellie, looking for any sign of this girl. Our search unit was split into 4 groups, each with 2 people, and were covering decent ground. While it had been a few hours since anyone had seen her, we didn't feel like a 13-year-old girl would cover that much distance. And, being young, she was likely to get tired and stop at some point. We got several hours into the search, and the darkness started to hit me with that sense of dread that comes with being out in those woods late at night. Even as it got late into the night, my partner, Pat, and I were not willing to slow down. I was ready to go through the entire night trying to find this girl. We did pause for a moment to take a quick break and get some water, eat the food that we brought with us, and to recoup some energy, but then we would be right back out there. As we paused and ate, We were both silent, just thinking and listening to the night sounds and seeing if we could hear Ellie at all. I did hear something, but it wasn't Ellie. It was, however, unsettling. As I sat there and ate my granola bar, I started hearing what sounded like a soft humming. I paused my chewing and just listened for a moment. The humming sounded calming, like a child's lullaby. I glanced over at Pat and his eyes were on me, and wide. Like, you hear that too? We quickly packed up and started heading toward where we thought it was coming from, continuing to call out for Ellie, but keeping quiet for the most part, to see if we could decipher exactly where it was. As we kept on, we ended up coming out to a clearing in the trees that was brightly lit by the moonlight. The humming stopped the minute that we hit the clearing, but the silence that replaced it was almost stifling. The air got colder, and I swear I could see our breaths in the moonlight. We didn't hear anything. There was nothing to cause us to be alarmed, but something was incredibly off. I swear this small area was so still and silent that I could feel the earth rotating underneath my feet. Pat made a comment about radioing back to the team to see if there had been any progress on the other side. I grabbed the radio and asked for a status update from the other teams, but nothing came back. It was completely silent. No matter how many times I hit the buttons saying, "This is Blue Team, can we get an update?" there was never a response. I asked Pat if we should head back to meet with the rest of the crew and figure out what we should do to expand the search, and he immediately agreed. I think that he was freaking out about the feeling that this part of the woods was giving off. I was too. I was just better about hiding it. We started making our way back, and about 20 minutes back towards the campground, a voice came over the radio saying, "Blue Team, please respond." I grabbed the radio immediately and responded, telling them that we were here and that we hadn't had any luck and were heading back towards the camp. The voice on the other end sounded a bit confused, asking us where we were. I told them our approximate location out from the camp, and they then asked why we hadn't been responding. I was confused now, saying that we had been trying to get a hold of everyone else, and that they weren't responding. And then the voice mentioned that they'd been trying to reach us for an hour to no success, that Ellie had been located, and that they were preparing to send a team out to find us. When we got back to the camp, I talked to the other teams about what had happened. They told us that, about an hour prior to us getting back a hold of them, Ellie had been located about 3 miles in the opposite direction. She was shaken, but otherwise okay. She was asked what had happened, and she mentioned that she was out for a walk in the woods, and that she had actually gone the direction that me and Pat went. She decided to go back to the camp, but for whatever reason, she could not seem to find her way back. She had a compass, and she'd been walking in a straight line in the woods, but when she turned around to go back, it seemed like the compass was pointing in the wrong direction, and she walked for a long time until she realized that she was super lost. What's strange is that Pat and I went straight north. If she had gone that same direction and somehow turned around but overwalked, she should have been straight south. But she was found 3 miles to the northwest, which made literally no sense. Even stranger, she mentioned that she heard the humming in the woods too, and that was what made her scared, so that's when she turned around. She didn't mention ever getting to the clearing though, just the humming. Obviously, we were glad that she was found, confused by the humming and the fact that they couldn't reach us for quite a while, and a bit chilled over what we'd experienced out there. But I guess that was all in a night's work. Just a random fun fact to note, as this story is pretty much over, Pat and I actually went back out to that area about 2 weeks later, when there weren't any campers out, and we walked in the same direction that we had, for about the same amount of time, and we could not for the life of us find that clearing again. We were certain that we should have entered it at some point, but it was just not there. It was super weird, and I have no idea what that forest is hiding, or what was going on that night. But it was apparently temporary. Obviously, this was going on 40 years ago, so I no longer work there. I'm retired, but this was one of the weirdest nights that I'd experienced. I do have a few more stories that I could share with you at some point, and I might, when I get the time. But hopefully this one is sufficiently scary for you and your listeners. Right before the craziness that was 2020, my girlfriend and I went on a road trip around Indiana with plans on sightseeing in a state park and a few other local attractions. Bridget and I had been on long trips together, and it's become one of our favorite things to do. To be able to just go across the state, or even the country, to see places that we've never been before. We plan on visiting at least all the states once, and we're about a third of the way there so far. Anyways, this would be our first time actually spending time in Indiana, instead of just passing through. After looking at our options, we opted to check out the Rocky Hollow Falls Canyon in Turkey Run State Park. We went in October, and while I haven't seen it in the summer, that place was meant for autumn, and I would still recommend it despite our experience. Entering the canyons, it looked like something straight out of something like The Hobbit. The small trail along the creek was therapeutic to walk while listening to the water flow. The mossy rocks looked straight out of a painting. It was quite a serene and peaceful day. We found a small secluded spot lined with boulders and decided to stop there for a break and eat. While sitting and chatting, I started hearing what sounded like someone walking above us. There were different levels at different areas of the park, so it was normal to hear or see people walking along the rocks above you, or below you, towards the creek. So it was one of those moments that I made a note of, but that was it. Our conversation slowed down so we could finish our lunch, which gave me a chance to focus on the sounds around us again. This time I could hear the sound of footsteps approaching us. When I didn't see someone in front of us, I turned around to see who was coming, but again, I didn't see anyone. This time it didn't sound like it was coming from the trail above us. But I checked anyway, and there was no one there either. Bridget was looking around too and looked at me like, "Where's that coming from?" I shrugged, thinking that I just wasn't seeing them or something explainable. We were just about finished when I scanned the area and finally saw something that looked out of place. There was a large boulder, probably 15 or 20 feet from us, and I could clearly see someone with short hair peeking out from behind it, staring at us. I thought it was weird because, with the size of the boulder, they had to be crouching or maybe on their knees to be hidden behind it. I pointed him out to Bridget too, and she definitely thought it was weird as well. We tried to ignore it, but as we both glanced over and saw them still staring at us, Bridget said that she was feeling weirded out by it. So we decided to finish the last of our sandwiches as we walked. We got past that area and beyond a small waterfall of sorts, and again paused to take more photos. While Bridget was trying to get closer to the water, I was looking around at the area again because I was starting to get the feeling like we were being watched. I usually ignore those feelings, as I was used to us being stared at, but due to the person behind the boulder earlier, I felt the need to find who exactly was watching us. And, as expected, I saw what looked like the same short-haired person that I had seen earlier, now trying to hide behind a tree. I pointed them out to Bridget again, and her expression quickly changed. She was worried that they may be following us since we had been secluded for some time, and I shared the sentiment. If they were following us, maybe they were going to try and rob us, or who knows what. We both agreed to again move on, and maybe get back around some other people so that we weren't alone. We made our way to the upper part of the rocks, and since we hadn't seen the person in a while, we stopped again to take in the sight. This time I started digging through my backpack looking for something, when Bridget nudged me. When I looked at her, she nodded to yet another boulder where our same stalker was hiding. At this point, I was pretty fed up. I still didn't know their intentions, but so far they've just been giving us the creeps, and I didn't want our trip ruined. While I was enjoying it too, I know that these meant a lot to Bridget. Bridget was actually a foster kid, and within the homes that she lived in, they never went on any kind of trips or vacations. So any time that we do anything out of our norm, she gets extremely excited about it and wants to do all that she can. I mean, who could blame her? So this time, since the person wasn't taking any action, I decided that I would, hopefully scaring them off and to let them know that they chose the wrong targets. I, instead, grabbed the hunting knife that I had in my bag and told Bridget to stay where she was. She was hesitant to let me go at first, but I assured her that I would be fine. I started to slowly approach the boulder, the person still looking over it, now watching me approach. When I was about 4 feet in front of the boulder, I loudly, and as intimidatingly as I could, said, "What the hell are you doing, bro?" And they quickly dropped behind the boulder. I slowly made my way around it and was shocked by what I saw. First, I thought the guy just had really short hair, like a buzz cut, but no. This guy was completely bald. However, they had so many cuts and scratches across their head that were covered in scabs that, from a distance, it truly looked like hair. And that's how many cuts and scrapes he had. It looked pretty painful and unsettling as it is. But to add to it, this guy appeared gaunt, with skin that looked bluish gray and leathery. I thought that he just looked lighter from a distance because of lighting or something, but no. He was absolutely sickly looking, and the color was completely unnatural. He was crouched, and when I reached the boulder, I was on his left. The way that he was crouched, I could clearly see his spine and even his hips. I was also able to see this so well because he was completely naked. So, taking this all in, I paused where I was. This was not what I was expecting to see, but before I could process much more, the guy quickly snapped his head to the left to look at me and let out a wholly unhuman hiss. It made me jump back a few steps, and I guess that he took that as an opportunity because he immediately pounced on me, knocking me to the ground. With him now on top of me, I could see his bloodshot eyes and the dark sunken sockets around them. His cheekbones were also very visible and sunken in. He looked terrifying and severely sick and malnourished. Bridget was now screaming, and I was just trying to get him off of me, but I was also still holding the knife. I went in to swing my right arm, my right hand being the one holding the knife, but this guy's reflexes were insane. He locked onto my arm and he bit into the arm, causing me to drop the knife. I shouted a few expletives, and Bridget managed to throw a rock at us. This must have startled him as he jumped, hissing at Bridget. As she continued shouting and screaming to get off of me, he actually listened and took off, on all fours. He ran so quickly that it almost seemed natural for him. Once he was finally out of view, Bridget ran over to me as I got up and immediately checked my arm. He'd bitten hard enough to draw blood. Of course, now I'm worried about what that guy might have had and possibly spread to me. I immediately poured water and sanitizer onto it, and we quickly tried to make our way to someone who could help. We ended up at a shortcut back to the entrance, and found someone of authority to let them know what had happened. The guy that took my information had a suspicious look the entire time that we explained it to him. At first I thought he probably just didn't believe me. However, he said that this actually wasn't the first time they've had a report of a naked man roaming around the area, but they had yet to actually find him. I don't know if it made me feel better or worse that we weren't alone in what we saw. After providing him with any information that we had, we left, making a beeline to the nearest hospital to get checked out. Thankfully, all the tests came back negative, and even after more tests at home, I was fine. I got a few shots just in case, but the fear that I may have been infected with something was pretty damn terrifying. The rest of the trip was fine, with no other weird people watching or attacking us, but it's something that I'm never going to forget. 9 out of 10, though. I would absolutely return to the canyons. Hopefully the other visits will be more chill and fully clothed. I have been an avid hiker and camper for most of my adult life. I'm into all the outdoorsy stuff, but for the life of me, there is one thing that I experienced back in the late 90s that I cannot shake out of my mind. This was back whenever I was in my mid-20s, so I was pretty mentally and physically fit. No hallucinations and nothing that would have caused me to imagine things. I've tried to rationalize all of this, and for some reason, I just can't seem to get through it in my head. I believe that this would have been in 1999, specifically because I recall that there was a lot of buildup and talks about Y2K, and people were saying the satellites were going to fall out of the skies, and that the government was going to take over the banking system or something stupid. I don't remember it all, and I didn't really care because I knew that it was all a joke, and that none of that would happen. Unfortunately, my friend group at the time was a bit weird, and they were all panicking and prepping and whatnot. I decided that I wanted to get away for a while, so I figured, why not get away from everything, and everyone, and do whatever I wanted out in nature. When I wanted to get away, I used to spend a lot of time hiking in a specific national park that was up in Maine, because I loved all of the secluded and complex trails that existed. There were some pretty gorgeous views off of the cliffs and the large bodies of water, so I knew that if I just spent a couple of days out there, I would feel much better. The first day was just as beautiful as I had expected. I started early, so I got to wake up to the sun coming up over the cliffs. I got to watch the dew slowly raise off the ground, and feel that cool but humid wind blow across my skin. I'm not going to lie, those memories are serene. I did my hikes, I absorbed the energy that the national park emitted. Yes, I'm that kind of person. On the second day, I wanted to push myself a bit more, and had decided that I was going to take a specific trail, the Sargent Mountain Loop. It's not really a popular trail, or at least wasn't. I have no idea if it is now. So, I got all of my stuff together, filled up my bottles, and headed out early in the morning. The start of the trail was exactly as I'd anticipated. Mostly wooded areas that opened up to rocky formations, and streams crossing here and there. It honestly was a nature trail at its best. But about 30-ish minutes into the hike, things started to get weird. The first thing I noticed was the trail markers. I've done enough trail hikes to recognize a trail marker, and to know that they're usually small things like paint on trees, but some of the markers were really strange, almost like runic symbols. I don't know jack about runes or whatever, but I know that they usually have weird lines that go in all directions, or whatever. And that's what these were. They weren't just normal markings. They were drawn symbols. I thought that maybe it was just someone messing around, or a vandal or something like that, so I pressed on, and just pretended that they weren't there. But then the atmosphere felt like it changed. The air got thick, almost like walking through molasses. Each step started to become a chore, probably what it would feel like if I went to go do the trail nowadays. But back then, I was a fit young man and I knew that I could do the hike. Yet, for some reason, I was feeling like I was struggling to even take a single step. On top of that, I was starting to feel like I was getting hit with anxiety, and was hyper-focusing on the silence that was surrounding me. At this point, I decided that I needed to take a pause and catch my breath, and that something wasn't right. That silence honestly felt rather unnatural, and as I took notice, I started feeling this weird sensation of being watched. The hair on my arms started to bump up, and I was feeling the chills on the back of my neck. It wasn't just being watched. It was like I was being watched from every direction. Like no matter where I turned, it felt like there were eyes behind me. The rational part of my brain kept trying to tell me that it was just nerves, but that primal part that has survival as its only goal was saying that there was something dangerous going on. I immediately got up and decided that I needed to go ahead and wrap this hike up. I started to walk as fast as I could physically push myself back the way I came, down the clearly marked path, until there was no path. I was walking, and as I kept down the trail, I hit what was basically a dead end, which made no sense. There was no trail continuing in front of me. It was just trees. No markings, no clearings, and no diverging path. It was as if someone had been playing a Sims game and had just erased the path right there. Admittedly, I started panicking at this point. My heart rate skyrocketed and I felt the sweat starting to beat up on my forehead, in spite of the cool air. And all the while, that sense of being watched was feeling like it was getting worse. I tried to retrace my steps back the way I had come from, the way that still had the trail, but every turn I took seemed like it was just part of this really strange and broken trail maze. Each one made me feel more disoriented than the last. This is where things hit their worst. As I was breathing heavily, panicking, feeling like the world was spinning around me, I swear I started to hear voices. It was like multiple people talking in unison, and it seemed to be coming from wherever I was being watched from. If I had to give it a better description, it was like a siren's call. It was beckoning me towards the trees, deeper into those woods. I knew that I needed to get the hell away from this spot, but I had no idea where I was. I had no idea where it was coming from, and I felt like I was getting sick. I just picked a direction and took off, assuming that I was going the right way. After a few minutes of running at a full sprint, I collapsed. I remember running. I remember my legs feeling numb and my face feeling like it was vibrating, and my vision pinpointing. I had this thought that I was going to pass out, and then the ground came up to meet my face, and I was out. I woke up probably only a few moments later, and to my surprise, I was just off to the side of the trail that I had been looking for. The markers were back to normal, and they were all clearly visible. I pushed myself up and looked around, thinking, how the hell did I get back here? But there I was. I sat there for a few moments, taking a few drinks of water and catching my breath, and when I thought I was okay, I headed back to where the trail started. There was literally nothing wrong with the entire hike back to the beginning. This was a terrifying experience for me, one that got me to never go back to those trails. I talked with a friend of mine that was also an avid hiker, one that knew those trails as well, and they had no idea what had happened, saying that the trails are fairly obvious and marked, and that none of them come to a straight-up dead end like that. He mentioned that it could have been dehydration or exhaustion, or possibly an anxiety attack, and I just agreed with him, mostly because I didn't want to talk further about it. Whatever it was not any of those. It was something else. There was something in the woods that day that had malicious intent, and I don't know how I escaped it, but I did. I dread to even consider what could have happened if I hadn't. Hi, how are you, Raven? I wanted to say that you have a cool channel. Your Australian accent needs work, but I'm happy that you're sharing some Aussie stories with people. Thanks. I live next to one of the national parks in New South Wales. Living this close to nature means you get to deal with the wildlife and some of the weird local characters. Bushfires, floods, that sort of thing too. And idiots who think they can just head off into the bush without bringing supplies, who rarely manage to stumble in. You also get the things that people don't really talk about. I haven't heard any Aboriginal legends about the land around here. However, they are supposed to be some sacred sites, and they're pretty secretive about it. Given everything, I understand that. Anyways, I was out on the veranda having a beer in the late Arvo. It was dusk, the sun was still up, and I'm pretty sure that it was in the summer. Before you ask, no, the beer wasn't a Foster's. No one in Australia drinks that. I think it was a VB or a Tooheys. I thought I saw someone standing at the edge of the tree line. They weren't moving. As I said, sometimes bushwalkers would go into the bush and get lost. Normally they would hurry toward any building they saw to try to get to safety. I waved at them, expecting them to either wave back or screw off. It just stood there staring at me. I thought it was one of my mates being a cheeky prick and started to walk over there, with my beer in hand. I didn't see anyone over there, though. I called out a couple of times to be sure. I hadn't really had that much to drink, so it wasn't back. I walked back to the veranda and my blue cattle dog named Red was barking. His job is to bark if people come close, or if there is a snake nearby or something. I asked him what was wrong, and he kept at it. Eventually, I just told him to shut up. I'd had some things to do, so I wasn't watching the tree line like before, and I nearly missed it. When I looked again, I saw this time that the shadow figure was back, and this time it was joined by 3 others. They didn't really move. They watched me, and since it was darker now, I didn't feel safe going over there alone. I went in the house and looked up any reports of people being around or who were lost. There was nothing. I didn't want to be inside, Red kept going to the doors and windows and barking. I don't believe in ghosts or any of that spooky BS. I kept the outside lights on all night, and whenever I looked out the window, there was no one there. I freaking hated it. I couldn't sleep in my bed that night, so I stayed in front of the telly to distract myself. There were some crappy ads sometime during the early morning that woke me up. I got up to get a cuppa and realized that it was dawn. The sky was pink, and it already looked like it was going to be a killer storm rolling in. I couldn't help but check the tree line, and I saw them again. I called a mate to come stay with me. I didn't want to be seen as a little wimp, so I didn't tell him why I wanted him to come. He drove out, and we sat with our VBs on the veranda, watching the storm. He was telling me about some Sheila that he was seeing, and I finally told him what happened. He took a mouthful and told me that I must have annoyed the spirits somehow, and that they were telling me to behave myself. I don't know what I could have done. I thought at first he was pulling my leg, but he didn't laugh or joke. He stayed the night on the couch since he was freaking plastered, and it wouldn't be safe for him to drive through the storm. I woke up with a massive hangover and went to grab a cup of coffee when I saw that there was a bloody sheep heads on the veranda. What the hell? I screamed for my mate to come and look. I don't have any sheep where I am, but one of my neighbors did, and I would guess that they were his. It almost looked like the heads had been torn off. I don't want to get into trouble with my neighbor or the cops, so we buried them and pretended not to know why it happened. The shadow people in the bush didn't appear anymore after that. I don't know if that made them happy, or if that was their way of warning me. It's messed up. I don't know what I did to make them angry with me to begin with. So that, my friends, was today's collection of some national park stories. Technically the first collection of national park stories I've ever done. I've done In the Woods stories, I've done, well, that's pretty much it. I feel like I've done more, not just In the Woods, like Deep Woods, stuff like that, but I've never done a collection that were just stories that happened at national parks, and alas, here we are. National park stories. Hopefully, you all enjoyed this collection of stories. I know that I did. Some weird stuff out there going on in those forests. Some of them a long time ago, some of them more recent. But yeah. I can say I have been to a national park because we went to Yellowstone and Bryce Canyon, actually. Some nice places out there. Out in the over towards Utah area. That's actually where, I know I've mentioned this before, like on stream, and I think in a video outro before, but whatever. Bryce Canyon National Park is actually where we fed the raven. I fed him crackers. He loved them. She loved them. Sorry. I think it was a she. We determined that it was something. I don't remember. Whatever. It loved the crackers. It liked us. It just sat there. It was so big and happy. I miss it. That's the only place I'd probably go back, really. Just to see the ravens. I wish we had ravens here in Kansas. We have crows, though. Crows are cool. Anyways, hopefully, like I said, you all enjoyed the stories. If you did, do let me know in the comments down below, telling me your thoughts. You can also hit the thumbs up button, as that tells me you enjoyed the video. It also tells YouTube you enjoyed the video. You can also subscribe if you are new to the channel and would like more content like this, or stuff that isn't like this. I do so many topics and so many different things. As of right now, on my community tab, I am collecting ideas and topics from my audience, so if you haven't seen that, go over to the community tab on my channel and let me know what you would like to see. It's a dreaded question because I always get people saying more glitch stories. However, this time I said please don't say more glitch stories, and shockingly enough, I don't think anyone has. So, fun. Get some actual ideas out of this one. It's all in fun. It's just last time I asked, like I said, I think 20% of the comments were asking for more glitch stories. I'm like, please, no, I can't do those more than once a week. Anyways. There's a few other things that you can do, like joining the memberships or the Patreon to get access to content like this, early access. You can also do a super thanks, which is just a tip to the channel, a little bit extra support, never expected, always, always appreciated. And yeah. And my friends, I hope I do see you again here very soon, but until then, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. And until I see you again, my friends, much love, and sleep well.